Resident Evil 4 changed third-person shooters forever. So I've seen a couple articles talking about this, especially with, it being the 20-year anniversary coming up when it comes down to Resident Evil 4's release, which is insane to think about. I feel like it was just yesterday. I was actually really excited to get this game for my birthday. So the fact that we're getting some information on this, I thought was pretty cool. Just gives us a little bit of a perspective as to the game itself and how it kind of changed the landscape of AAA gaming and just gaming as a whole. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I gotta say, out of all the games I've ever played, definitely Resident Evil 4 is my favorite game of all time. I think the one that would take the second place after that would have to be Ocarina of Time, but overall, Resident Evil 4 takes the cake for me. It's the game I've played so many times. It's the game I've had so much fun playing. I've replayed it probably over 100 times. I feel like I can confidently say that, and have beaten it probably over 100 times. So the fact that we're getting some like kind of kudos getting thrown at its way, I think that's really cool, and it's something I definitely want to do a video on. So go ahead and go over the article, and then per usual, go ahead and get my thoughts as we go along. So, Resident Evil 4 launched on the Nintendo GameCube on this day in 2005. 5 years into the 21st century, Capcom delivered the game that would define the next 20. It's Resident Evil 4's world, and modern AAA gaming is just living in it. That's a big statement, but I'll explain. With all those years in between, it can be easy to forget what games looked like before Resident Evil 4. I'm not exempt. I didn't play the survival horror classic until 2016, so my defining memory from its actual release era is hiding the Nintendo Power issue featuring it on the cover from my parents. So yeah, because I think the cover of it was where it showed the chainsaw man kind of hitting Leon in the neck, and you can kind of see some blood splattering. So if that is the one that they're talking about here, yeah, I can definitely see why some parents would be like, yeah, you're not gonna be looking at this at your age, kind of a thing. Thanks to that issue, I was also vaguely aware of its opening village set piece, or at least that it involved a chainsaw, a dude with a burlap sack on his head, and a shambling horde of zombies Spaniards. The game existed as iconography, and given that there were official chainsaw controllers sold for GameCube and PS2 proto memes, I had no idea just how influential it was until much later. And for me, I was definitely around when this game had came out. I had an older cousin that had it, so I got to experience it through him for the very first time. And it was one of those things. I remember when I played it for the first time, I was hooked, man. I just remember playing from the beginning up until the part where you face the lake monster, and it was one of those things. I remember I was sitting there playing it, I kept losing and then losing, and got to the point where I had stayed up all night. So by the time I was like pretty much losing that part of the game, the sun was already coming up. So I was like, all right, I think I gotta get some sleep, because if not, I feel like my aunt and uncle are probably gonna be like, what the hell have you been doing up this whole time, kind of a thing. But it was one of those things. I remember that so much and just having so much fun. And also the fact that I was the only one that was awake still playing the game. And when I had gotten to the lake, it was one of those things. I was shooting at all the fishes in the water, and I ended up having the monster kind of eat me whole. I think that might have been where I was kind of like, I got so scared. I was like, oh shit. I was just kind of like, all right, I think I need to call it right here, kind of a thing, which is hilarious looking back. So Resident Evil 4 deserves its flowers. Though Resident Evil 4 doesn't tend to get quite as much credit as earlier innovators like Super Mario 64, which helped lead the charge for 2D to 3D, its release is just as much a dividing line between the past and present of gaming. If you've played third person shooters released in the 90s and early 2000s, you know that the camera was frequently placed high above the character. The first three Resident Evil games had fixed camera angles, but with Resident Evil 4, it moved behind the player's character's back. When Leon lined up and shot, it zoomed in to provide an over the shoulder view. Yeah, and that was one of the things too, was just that gameplay at the time was just kind of so unique. There wasn't any games that really had followed with that method. So being able to see that type of thing go on for like a game like that was just innovative, and it was one of those things that just kind of helped really shape the gaming moving forward from that point on. Resident Evil 4 has been so influential, in fact, that the modern AAA space might look entirely different without it. In the early 2000s, games in the God of War, Metal Gear Solid, Silent Hill, and Grand Theft Auto series all looked and played completely differently. Yet the most recent entry of each series has used the over the shoulder perspective Resident Evil 4 pioneered. Most AAA games looked and played pretty similar to each other in 2025, and Resident Evil 4's brilliance is largely to blame. Resident Evil 4 changed Resident Evil. As good as Resident Evil 4 is, it had negative impact on its own franchise. Every Resident Evil game since has been defined by its relationship with Resident Evil 4. Its sequels, Resident Evil 5 and 6, increasingly focused on action and the expense of survival horror and rare lesser games because of it. Resident Evil 7 was a return to form because it pivoted away from the direction the series was going in, and Resident Evil Village was, in large part, a homage to 4. The remake of Resident Evil 2 and 3 took the perspective 4 brought to the series back to the entries that preceded it, and the Resident Evil 4 remake, owes quite a bit to Resident Evil 4. So, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. Personally, I wasn't really the biggest fan of Resident Evil 4. I feel like Resident Evil 4 original beats Resident Evil 4 remake hands down easily. Especially because I went and replayed Resident Evil 4 remake, and the gameplay isn't bad necessarily. It's just the storyline and a lot of changes that they made were just a lot of things I just wasn't happy with, and I just don't agree with the direction that they decided to go in with certain aspects of the game. So I will give it, some kudos here and there for what they were able to do as far as the remake goes. But overall, I personally was disappointed, which is crazy because I know everyone talks about how much they loved it and how great it was. And I hear a lot of the stuff that people have to say, and I'm just like, yeah, I don't necessarily agree with it personally. It didn't take long after the game's release for developers to recognize the paradigm shift. Gears of War, which launched less than 2 years after Resident Evil 4, took the over the shoulder perspective and ran with it. Iconic survival horror series like Dead Space and The Last of Us wouldn't exist, at least not in their current forms, without Resident Evil 4's perspective or its fusion of action, narrative, and scares. And that is one of the things that was so amazing about Resident Evil 4, the original at the time, was the fact that they were able to make it an action game, but it had a pretty good narrative for the time, and then it was able to kind of put some scares in it that really had people like, damn, like that's pretty cool considering how the entries beforehand were mainly just horror and not really action based. And yeah, there was some like decent narratives and stories that went with the games before, but even I mean, there's a little obviously there is some of it with Resident Evil 4, but a lot of the entries beforehand were very cheesy, kind of like B horror films kind of a thing where it wasn't like top of the line kind of story narratives and stuff. It was a little bit cheesy and had like a little bit of funniness that it had to it. So, most of the defining AAA games of the 20 years since, GTA 5, Uncharted, Red Dead Redemption, Breath of the Wild, and others, have borrowed Resident Evil 4's shooting perspective. If you ever pressed L2 to zoom in and get a closer look at your character's POV, you're engaged with one of Resident Evil 4's innovations. Given that most AAA games are in third person, Resident Evil 4's perspective is how most people see the medium. And yeah, that's a big thing. That was one of the great things about Resident Evil 4 was that it was just such a great game on its own. So many people had talked about how good it was and how much fun it was to play, as well as the fact that it was able to bring so much innovation to not just its own series, but just gaming in general, which was so cool. And one of my favorite things that I love about Resident Evil 4 to this day for me is the replayability. They were able to do a lot of things that had it so that when you play Resident Evil 4, the original, it makes you want to go back and do different runs of it with different types of weapons, different types of versions of things that you can do, which is so cool. That's one of the things I love so much about the original Resident Evil 4. That's one of the issues I've personally had as well with Resident Evil 4 Remake. Is that I played it a couple times because I was trying to get like a lot of the stuff unlocked, like a lot of weapons that you can make, with infinite ammo and stuff like that. I replayed it just to kind of get some of those unlocked. But overall, even after playing it recently, I just beat it the other day. It is one of those things that I don't have that same type of replayability fun that I do with the original. With the original, you can throw that one on anytime and I'll be willing to play. I'll be willing to get back into it and kind of just have fun with it. With remake, I'll play it, but there are certain parts and certain aspects of it that kind of feel like a drag that it's like, all right, this is more work than it is actual fun, which is why I feel like the original will top the remake any day for me personally. I think the remake is so great. I love it so much. Like I said, it's one of my favorite games. And I know there's lots of people that have issues with it because of the fact that for the time, it was really innovative and really fun to play. But modern day gaming mechanics and stuff like that, there are certain aspects of it that can feel kind of janky and a little bit stiff for modern day players. But I love it, man. It's my favorite game of all time, and being able to see that it's getting some love here with some of these articles that I've been able to check out, I think that's really cool, and it makes me really happy to see. So, those are my thoughts on that. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. If there are any Resident Evil fans of the original out there, as well as with the remake, do you guys think that the original is better than the remake, like I do, or do you? I feel like a lot of people might say that they actually prefer the remake over the original, but yeah, that's definitely not me. So let me know what you guys' thoughts are in the comments. If you guys could like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you guys have been watching this long, I really appreciate it. It means a lot. And yeah, until next time, Harmonic out. Peace.